Hello everybody, this is Mr. Gonzalez and this is the first of a 5-part lesson on the United States and its role in World War II. In this installment, we're going to begin by looking at the rise of totalitarian dictatorships in Italy and Germany and the emergence of militarism and nationalism in Japan. Let's begin with Italy. In the years following World War I, there was an increase in labor unrest in Italy. You had factory workers who were going on strike. You had farm workers who were going on strike. And this led some to believe that Italy was on the verge of a communist revolution. You have to keep in mind that this was coming on the heels of the Russian Revolution. The Tsar of Russia had been overthrown and replaced by a communist government led by Vladimir Lenin. And Lenin's goal was not just to seize power in Russia, his goal was to spread communism around the world. And many middle-class and upper-class Italians feared that this labor unrest was the first step in a communist revolution. In steps Benito Mussolini. Mussolini had been a sharpshooter in the Italian army during World War I, and this experience had turned him into a fierce Italian patriot. In the years after World War I, he formed a group known as the Black Shirts. And he uses the Black Shirts essentially as a paramilitary group. He sends them into the factories and breaks up strikes. He forces the workers to go back to work. He sends them into the countryside and forces the farm workers to go back to work. And because of this, he gains the support of Italian factory owners and large landholders. And in 1922, he leads his followers in what is known as the March on Rome. He is leading his followers toward the Italian capital. And he tells the Italian government, "Give us power or we will take it." So the King of Italy decides he is going to make Mussolini happy by naming him prime minister. And once Mussolini is in power, he begins to set up a fascist government. Now, what exactly is fascism, this form of government that Mussolini prefers? Simply put, it is a strong, central, one-party form of government. So once he is in office, he begins pushing laws through the Italian parliament that restrict the freedom of the press. And he pushes through another law that creates a secret police force. And he allows for the arrest of political dissenters. Anyone who opposes his views can be arrested. And eventually, he is given the power to make laws by decree. So from that point forward, if Mussolini wants a law passed, all he has to do is write it on a piece of paper and sign it, and it is official. It no longer has to go through Parliament. And toward the end of the 1920s, he officially outlaws all other political parties. So by the start of the 1930s, Mussolini is firmly in control of the Italian government. He has become a fascist, totalitarian dictator. Moving on to Germany. As you should remember from world history and from our discussion of World War I, Germany was in bad shape at the end of the First World War. It was struggling with inflation. Its government was in chaos. You may remember that during World War I, Germany was ruled by an emperor known as the Kaiser. That's actually German for Caesar. Toward the end of World War I, the Kaiser was forced to step down, and he was replaced by a democracy known as the Weimar Republic. Now, under the Weimar Republic, Germany had a president that was elected by the people and a parliament that made laws. So, in other words, Germany had a government that was not that different from the United States. Very briefly, let's talk about the Treaty of Versailles. Now, you should remember, the Treaty of Versailles is the treaty that officially ended World War I. And the terms of this treaty were humiliating to the German people. Germany lost 15% of its territory, had to get rid of its navy, had to reduce the size of its army to 100,000 men. They had to take responsibility for starting World War I. They had to pay reparations to Great Britain and to France for damages that were caused during the war. Into this situation steps Adolf Hitler. Now, like Mussolini, Hitler had been a soldier in World War I. He had been a corporal in the German army. And this experience had turned him into a fierce German patriot. After World War I, the German government sent Hitler to spy on a radical right-wing group known as the German Workers' Party. And after attending a few meetings, he realized that he actually agreed with many of this group's beliefs. He believed that the Treaty of Versailles was wrong. He wanted to see the Treaty of Versailles reversed. And he believed that Germany needed to go back to being ruled by a strong central government, like it had been during the times of the Kaiser. Hitler begins to speak at these meetings and he realizes that he's a very talented speaker. He reorganizes the party and he renames it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or for short, the Nazi Party. And in 1923, he attempts to overthrow the German government, just like Benito Mussolini had done in Italy. But Hitler is not successful. His attempt to overthrow the government fails. This is an event known as the Beer Hall Putsch. But his failed attempt turns Hitler into a household name in Germany. Everybody knows who Adolf Hitler is after this event. And this puts him on the national stage, gives him a national audience. So now, people across Germany, Hitler is able to reach an audience across the entire nation. Once the Great Depression begins, many Germans start to lose their jobs, and some of them turn to the Communist Party, thinking that the Communist Party will be able to solve their problems. Others turn to the Nazi Party. They think that in this time of crisis, Germany needs a strong central leader. And in 1932, Hitler runs for president and loses. But the Nazi Party has become the largest political party in all of Germany by this point. So the German president, Paul von Hindenburg, agrees to make Hitler prime minister. One month later, the German parliament building, the Reichstag, catches on fire. It burns in the middle of the night. To this day, nobody knows how the fire started. But Hitler blamed it on the communists. He claimed that this was an attempt by the Communist Party to overthrow the German government. And so he argues that for the public safety, freedom of the press has to be taken away, and freedom of expression has to be taken away, and eventually the German parliament does the same thing that the Italian parliament did to Mussolini. They gave Hitler the power to pass any law in Germany for the next 4 years. So Hitler, by the mid-1930s, is in firm control of the German government. And very quickly, we need to discuss Hitler's racial beliefs. Hitler believed that the German people were descended from a group known as the Aryans. We know that the Aryans appeared in India during ancient times, and they were supposedly tall and light-skinned. And he believed that these were the ancestors of the German people. And if the German people were going to survive, they had to get rid of any undesirable groups. Germans and undesirables should not be having children. And in Hitler's mind, these undesirables included Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, the mentally handicapped. And so his first target is the Jews. And in 1935, he passes a series of laws known as the Nuremberg Laws, which strips German citizenship away from Jews and forbids the marriage between Germans and Jews. And he begins to persecute the Jews, trying to force them to leave Germany. And he almost succeeds. By the time World War II starts, the Jewish population in Germany has gone down from around 800,000 to around 200,000. Now, very briefly, let's move on to Japan. Now, in the late 1920s and early 1930s, you see the rise of militarism in Japan. Japan had always been very poor in natural resources. It did not have a lot of oil, it did not have a lot of iron ore, and there were some in Japan who felt that the Japanese military should simply start invading other countries that had these resources. For example, parts of China had oil and iron ore. Japan should simply invade China and take these resources. Now, the name I want you to remember, the leader of Japan was the Emperor Hirohito. But the name I really want you to remember is Hideki Tojo. Now, Hideki Tojo was extremely militaristic, and he started out his career as the Japanese Secretary of War, or Minister of War, but eventually was promoted to Japanese Prime Minister. So he is more or less one position below the Emperor, and he will hold that position throughout World War II. Something else you need to remember is Japan is very anti-communist. They are also worried about communism spreading to Japan. And this is what draws Japan to form an alliance with Germany and Italy. Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler are both anti-communist. So eventually, Japan will sign a pact with those two countries simply because they all have a common enemy. They all fear the spread of communism.